Good morning. This meeting of the board is a hybrid physical virtual meeting. I'd like to welcome those in the boardroom with me today. While keeping your microphones muted, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice. Before we move to the business before the board today, I would like to recognize Zach Lund. Zach has served as my executive assistant since March 2023 and has been instrumental in working with our senior leaders and across the office of the board to implement the board's priorities. He was recently selected to serve in a new role as the agency's deputy chief of staff, where I know he'll continue to serve the agency and our important mission as well. Congratulations, Zach, and thank you for your service. I'd also like to recognize Luke Gallegos, who will be serving as my acting executive assistant. Luke has held important roles in both the Office of Examination and the Office of Regulatory Policy, so he brings a wealth of experience into this new role. I look forward to working with him in the office of the board. At this time, I will ask the secretary to the board to address a few technical and protocol items.
We have a quorum. The full board is present for this meeting. Chairman Logan, Board Member Hall, and Board Member Smith. Your microphone should normally be muted, except for board members and presenters. Please ensure that you have silenced any mobile devices you have with you. The virtual portion of this hybrid meeting is on Cisco WebEx. We have two OIT staff, Ben Rana and Victor Amaya, monitoring and managing the meeting. They will be locking this meeting and no new connections will be allowed. OIT will be advancing the slides, so you will hear the presenter say, "Next slide." If you are an FCA or FCA staff member, you're considered a panelist. The outside visitors are considered attendees. Everyone will see the slides as they advance. If you lose connectivity in this meeting, please contact Victor Amaya. Lastly, this meeting is being recorded. The video recording of the open portion of this meeting will be posted for public viewing for a limited period of time. Chairman Logan, that concludes the technical and protocol items. We're ready to continue when you are.
Thank you. The secretary will read an opening statement on the government and the Sunshine Act.
This is an open Farm Credit Administration board meeting under the Government and the Sunshine Act. If anyone raises a subject that may be discussed in closed session as permitted by the Government and the Sunshine Act, Chairman Logan will entertain a motion to close the meeting.
We will now review the published meeting agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda as published?
I move to adopt the agenda as published.
I second that motion.
The motion has been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion on the matter? Hearing none, the secretary will record the vote on the motion.
Mr. Hall?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Chairman Logan?
Aye. Motion carries. Next, we will consider whether any portions of the meeting should be closed to the public.
Mr. Chairman, the agenda does not include items that we should properly discuss in closed session. I move that the entire meeting remain open.
I second the motion.
The motion has been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion on the matter? Hearing none, the secretary will record the vote on the motion.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Hall?
Aye.
Chairman Logan?
Aye. The motion carries. Please turn to tab 1. The next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes as presented behind tab 1.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the minutes for the October 10th, 2024 regular board meeting as presented.
I second that motion.
The motion has been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion on the matter? Hearing none, the secretary will record the vote on the motion.
Mr. Hall?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Chairman Logan?
Aye. Motion carries. Please turn to tab 2. At this time, I will ask Tyler Fish of the Office of EEOI to present the report on access to capital in Indian country. This is an information item.
Thank you, Chairman Logan, Board Member Hall, Board Member Smith. My name is Tyler Fish. I'm a Senior Advisor and Assistant to the Director in the Farm Credit Administration, Office of Equal Employment, Opportunity, and Inclusion. I appreciate the opportunity to present to you on the FCA's Indian Country Capital Access Initiative. Next slide, please. I know we have all met previously. However, for the benefit of others who may not be familiar with my background, some brief words on my part. FCA, Wasio. My name is Tyler Fish. I'm Muskogee Creek and Cherokee. I've been an Indian Country professional for 16 years, and I've served in advocacy and policy roles concerning federal Indian law and policy within my own tribal government and the federal government. I have served as policy advisor and tribal liaison on issues concerning natural resources management, criminal law and jurisdiction, tribal governance, and economic development, to name a few. I previously served as the acting executive director of the White House Council on Native American Affairs and as the senior policy advisor and tribal liaison at the White House Office of Intergovernmental Affairs. I joined the FCA in April of 2023, wherein one of my primary roles and duties has been to serve as a tribal liaison and to provide support and context to this Indian Country Capital Access Initiative. Next slide, please. The Indian Country Capital Access Initiative is a collaborative effort to support greater awareness of the farm credit system, the system's resources, and the role of the Farm Credit Administration in regulating the system in Indian Country. Ultimately, this is an initiative that is designed to support the Farm Credit Administration's mission to ensure a farm credit system that is available to all creditworthy borrowers and individuals. This initiative is particularly important because of the unique challenges to capital access that exist in Indian Country. Challenges such as limited lending infrastructure, legal restrictions on tribal land use, financial institutions' general unfamiliarity with tribal governance, and a lack of a tax base upon which to build supportive capital access networks at the local level. And these are just the capital access challenges that exist. These challenges overlay the underlying needs to address other challenges, such as food scarcity, food deserts, a chronic lack of housing, need for supportive infrastructure like electrification, irrigation, telecommunications, wastewater treatment. And then the general federal enclave status of tribal lands in most instances creates a barrier of accessibility to other state-run and local programs which may be designed to support capital access and agricultural development among the broader community. In this context, it's easy to understand why a tribal producer or even an elected tribal government official can get stymied looking for resources to support community and economic development. It's also easy to understand why it's a challenge for the lending community to grasp the full circumstances that affect economic development in Indian Country. Indian Country, however, is resilient, and our communities value our sovereignty. I like to think of sovereignty as a vision statement. There are 574 separate vision statements out there, one for each federally recognized Indian tribe. Tribal sovereignty is not a concept that is difficult to grasp. It's as easy as of the people, by the people, and for the people, as we see it and how we wish to choose to pursue development in our communities. Communities that have a desire for food security, a culturally relevant, nutritious diet, inclusive economies that capture cash flow rather than extractive economies that move cash flows off the reservations, and a connection to our neighbors to support mutually beneficial trade and economic activity. Next slide, please. Of course, the efforts of the Indian Country Capital Access Initiative are not carried out in a vacuum. We at OEOI owe much gratitude to our internal FCA partners who support this initiative, including policy support and outreach from the Office of Regulatory Policy, collaborative engagement support from the Office of Data Analytics and Economics, and outreach and engagement support from the Office of the Chief of Staff. Next slide, please. We are equally grateful for the collaboration we've enjoyed from our external partners and stakeholders who support capital access and agricultural development in Indian Country. A few of the organizations we work with include the White House Council on Native American Affairs, the Minneapolis Federal Reserve Center for Indian Country Development, the Intertribal Agriculture Council, Native CDFI Network, the Native American Agriculture Fund, and the Tribal Self-Governance Communication and Education Consortium. This isn't necessarily an exhaustive list. However, it does encompass some of the key stakeholders that represent important policy and thought leadership on economic development in Indian Country. Next slide, please. We've taken a very active role in engaging with Indian country over the past year. Since I joined the FCA in April of 2023, the FCA has been a participant in the White House Council on Native American Affairs Economic Development, Energy, and Infrastructure Committee. We've worked with the Minneapolis Federal Reserve Board Center for Indian Country Development. We've hosted a tribal listening session at the Intertribal Agriculture Council's Northwest Regional Summit and performed direct engagement with the IAC's National Technical Assistance Network. We presented at the Native CDFI Network's annual Policy and Capacity Building Summit and the Native American Agriculture Fund's Indian Country Agriculture Underwriting course. And earlier this year, in the spring, I'm proud to report that we presented in conjunction with representatives from the system at the Tribal Self-Governance Conference hosted by the Tribal Self-Governance Communication and Education Consortium. Next slide, please. These external engagements and collaborations have revealed a number of observations. First and foremost is that there is a significant challenge to overcome unfamiliarity about the system in Indian country. On numerous occasions, we have visited with tribal producers or advocates for agricultural development in Indian country, and those conversations have revealed that there is simply not a common knowledge or awareness that the system is a unique provider of products and services to support agriculture. It is more common that tribal producers understand that there are one of two options: the commercial lending industry and other federal programs such as the USDA. More often than not, it appears that tribal producers are compelled to seek capital access through the USDA's programs, even though many of them lament the onerous paperwork and process that's required of them to take advantage of those resources. It's also clear that overcoming this barrier of unfamiliarity is not a one-way street. More education within Indian country will certainly help to alleviate their unfamiliarity. More familiarity with Indian country will simultaneously help the system to engage there. This principle is underscored in the chairman's message to the system last November, encouraging the designation or hiring of dedicated tribal liaisons. And moreover, anecdotally, we've heard firsthand from tribal producers how having a representative who understands both Indian country and agriculture is critical to them. Second observation, there are solutions to many of the capital access challenges that are commonly associated with Indian country. We've seen firsthand how the system can craft solutions to the challenges that producers in Indian country face. In one instance, we heard from a would-be tribal producer who stated she could not get startup financing for her farming operation because the representative that she was working with, who I might add was not from the system, felt that it was too difficult to navigate the quote-unquote Indian country issue. However, coincidentally, a representative from the system was in that conversation with us. This representative was able to analyze this woman's challenges and craft solutions that were appropriate for her startup financing on the spot. She needed an equipment loan. An equipment loan did not require real estate collateral, but somebody at another lending provider was not able to listen to her needs and understand her circumstances. Again, tribal liaisons are very helpful in these types of situations. Producers have said to us time and again, they don't feel understood by the industry of capital access providers that are out there. Our third observation, YBS Authority appears to be the most adept policy vehicle to support engagement and capital access among tribal producers by the system. Next slide, please. Demographics, general data, and information available on Indian country suggests that many prospective borrowers in Indian country are going to fit into system YBS plans. Among some of the trends that we see that support this notion are an increased interest in small-scale regenerative agriculture among tribal producers, probably focused on local food markets, food hubs, probably not even considering the fact that we have over 300 Bureau of Indian Education and Bureau of Indian Affairs funded education and corrections facilities that have a food service delivery mission and a statutory a statutory mandate to prioritize native vendors for that food service delivery. As I mentioned in the anecdote on the previous slide, challenges to accessing startup capital is a common theme. For those of you who are producers yourselves, it may be this strikes a chord with you. It seems that attaining the first loan is the most challenging to producers. And lastly, we see a fairly prevalent trend in tribal youth to agriculture initiatives. These are being implemented nationwide by tribal governments, tribal government ag departments, tribal colleges and universities, other federal agencies that oversee those Bureau of Indian Education schools. And I don't believe I need to underscore this point with you gentlemen, but the YBS authority is important in this respect because it is the only area that the system can beneficially prioritize certain classes of borrowers. The system is in a unique position in Indian country to offer opportunity to borrowers who may not qualify for traditional credit or who may have challenges accessing funding through the USDA or other programs. Next slide, please. We have seen progress and we are continuing to see progress. The system is responding and not simply from a quote unquote check the box perspective. I believe that we have seen a genuine enthusiasm among system entities to increase their footprint in Indian country. And I want to give a genuine and general sense of appreciation for that. The next question that often follows expressions of interest is, how do we do that? It is helpful to have somebody who understands both worlds, Indian country and agriculture, such as a tribal liaison. That said, we've heard exciting and positive news from the system concerning electrification in tribal communities. We've seen efforts to hire positions that are designed to or with the responsibility to engage with tribal governments, tribal communities, and tribal producers. And we've seen genuine interest in mission-related investments in Indian country. All these efforts are commendable and beneficial. The truth is that watershed solutions to the challenges that face Indian country rarely ever happen in one fell swoop. More often than not, it requires piecing together a number of resources across a number of different agencies and making progress one bite or one step at a time. Next slide, please. Which is why we are continuing our efforts on this front. Through the next year, we will continue our collaborations with the Intertribal Agriculture Council, continue to support the White House Council on Native American Affairs and their capital access initiatives, and engage with the several intertribal nonprofit organizations and stakeholders who strategize and disseminate solutions to these challenges. Moreover, we're going to take a more direct approach to engaging at the tribal government and the tribal community level. Many tribal governments have designated officials, maybe secretaries of natural resources, secretaries of agriculture, or other resource management officials. We plan to engage with them directly to get more firsthand knowledge about their community agriculture profiles and to help close that gap of unfamiliarity between Indian country and the many products and services that are available to them through the farm credit system. These efforts will lead into the Tribal Agriculture Symposium, which is slated to be hosted in the fall of 2025 in partnership with the Oklahoma State University. That effort is being led by my colleague, Tyler Scribner, from the Office of the Chief of Staff. Our efforts to engage on the substantive matters and addressing the capital access challenge in the interim in Indian country are designed to support Mr. Scribner's development of our substantive content for the fall 2025 symposium and our continued tribal engagement beyond. Next slide, please. A final point that I would like to make with you gentlemen before I conclude and offer myself for any questions the board may have. The Indian Country Capital Access Initiative does not stand for the proposition that the system is the all-encompassing solution to the challenges to agricultural development that exist in Indian country. Our proposition and our message to tribal producers is that the system is an incredible resource that may hold advantages when compared to other federal or commercial options. We've seen at times that even the best aspects that the system offers can be paired with those other private and public sector resources. Tribal producers and tribal governments need to know that the system is a resource, is in their toolbox of options. Yet between the three options that exist for capital access, and I'm referring to the commercial lending industry, the federal government, and the system, presently it appears that tribal producers and tribal governments are least familiar with the system. So, not to end on a down note, I want to say that we have seen progress in the past year, and we hope to continue to see that progress. In that regard, we will continue to do our part from the FCA to overcome this barrier of unfamiliarity in Indian country while simultaneously encouraging the system to continue their efforts to reach Indian country and engage there as well. Next slide, please. Gentlemen, this concludes my presentation. Thank you. Mado, wado, dodarago ha'i. I look forward to visiting with you on these topics in the future, and I really appreciate your time and attention to these issues that are of personal importance to me. So thank you.
Thank you, Tyler. Does the board have any questions of Tyler on the material presented? Mr. Hall?
Not any question, Mr. Chairman, but it seems like listening and understanding is a key part of the progress that we're making. And I just want to say how much I appreciate the role you're filling for the agency, because I think that's showing results, and that's what we're really most interested in. So thanks, Tyler.
Thank you very
Mr.
much, Board
Chairman.
Member Hall.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank you for your part in the ceremony recognizing Native American Month. I think all of the staff enjoyed it, and Rear Admiral Foster's comments were particularly inspiring in his journey. We hit on something that I'd never thought of before in our briefing, and I think it's worthwhile to bring it up. I know that the challenges we hear, we always hear as being paramount in financing ag and ag country is collateralizing land and the issues with tribal land. And yet financing equipment and livestock does not necessarily mean collateralizing land. And when I started out as a YBS farmer, I had no land to collateralize, and yet you needed those resources to start. And I think that's a central theme that you hear when you interact with young beginning small farmers is access to land. We can't compete with intergenerational operations, large established operations. But we talked about in tribal lands, that might not necessarily be the case. And there might be some opportunities, access to land, not necessarily collateralizing or buying, but access to land, whether it be leasing or long-term leasing. Do you care to comment or elaborate a little bit further on what we talked about and possible opportunities? Because I think you really touched on something there.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for that question, Board Member Smith. There's been a lot of study of that in terms of what is the most beneficial use of tribal lands. And even within tribal reservations, not all land is trust. You have fee land that's there as well that can be collateralized. However, I think that the main focus here is there a potential shift in what tribal citizens or tribal governments want to use their land for? And believing that agriculture is a way to future, that's an economic future for them, and focusing their efforts on building those lands to benefit them. But I think I've read recently the rough estimate is that Indian country land is underutilized in terms of agriculture, and that if you were to compare the amount of land that's available for agriculture in Indian country compared to that's available in the private sector, it's not going to be larger, but it is going to be substantial. And if you're making the most efficient and economic use of that land for agriculture production, there is potentially a wave of either profit, economic development, community development that could come along with that.
I suppose you've got that conflict between preservation and development for economic purposes for agricultural. That's probably the central theme of the conflict in a lot of cases.
Well, I mean, don't get me wrong, there are certainly those aspects. I think that a lot of tribes have a strong interest in culturally relevant agriculture production. A lot of our tribes have a history of being stewards of the land, of being stewards of livestock, whether they be wild game that happen to be within their territory, but also, we've got the Three Sisters that I know that you're certainly aware of, that our tribes oftentimes based their livelihoods and economies around that. So, I mean, I think that there's just as much opportunity to develop tribal lands in a way that's beneficial for agriculture production while respecting cultural resources, because I think a lot of tribes will probably see those two things as one and the same, although I can't speak for them directly, of course.
Gotcha. All right. Well, thank you for those comments.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Tyler, for the report on where we are at the end of 2024. And I look forward to hearing more and seeing how things progress in 2025. And I appreciate your conclusion, and I 100% support the idea that the system can be part of the capital stack. It is not the sole source, and tribes do view things such as philanthropy, federal government, granting federal government loans. And if they put private sector banking in there and then the system in there, that would be the capital stack for some of these larger projects particularly. And I appreciate your bringing forth that conclusion. There are no further questions from the board. I thank you for your presentation. Now,
Thank you,
please
gentlemen.
adjourn. Please turn to the adjournment tab. If there's no further business to bring before the board, I will entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I move we adjourn the meeting.
Second the motion.
The motion has been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion on the matter? Hearing none, the secretary will record the vote on the motion.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Hall,
Aye.
Chairman Logan.
Aye. The motion carries. The meeting is adjourned.